I'm John Underwood. Welcome to Backstory, a program that attempts to look behind the headlines at the issues and events that affect our lives here in Orange County. Today we address the ongoing and growing cycle of homelessness in Orange County with a specific focus on the recent forced expulsions of the homeless from the Santa Ana Riverbed and from the county's Civic Center. And although these about 2,000 refugees in all represent only 15 to 20% of the total estimate of homeless in Orange County, their stories and their fates provide a sobering and cautionary tale for the rest of us. It behooves us, therefore, to take a closer look at who these so-called least of us are, and what has been done to them, and what is to be done about them. I have with me in the studio today two seasoned Orange County reporters who, along with me and other reporters and advocates, were out there on the riverbed documenting these evictions of hundreds of homeless and tracking their placements into temporary motels and shelters, or worse, back onto the streets. But first, let's rewind recent events a few months and take another look at the mass evictions that just happened on the riverbed and its aftermath in this episode of Backstory, Homeless in OC.
We need help here. Somebody's got to do something. There's over 2,000, 3,000 people out here homeless, living in tents, and they're telling us we got to go? I mean, come on, we ain't got nowhere to go. They already then ran us out of parks and off the street. We came here saying that it was okay to come here. Now they're running us off. What are we supposed to do?
This man seemed to speak for many of the 1,000 plus homeless who had migrated by choice or by coercion in the last few years onto the Santa Ana Riverbed. And on February 16th, facing imminent eviction by the county, his panic and confusion was evident and shared by many others on the riverbed as they waited for the big roll-up. Orange County, like other regions across the country, was facing unprecedented levels of homelessness by 2018. Each region addressing the crisis in their own way. But in Orange County, the leadership seemed to pay little attention to it at all, instead focusing its attention elsewhere, neglecting to address the growing underclass of displaced and underemployed. In 2017, the county 10-year plan to end homelessness was abandoned, and its county-appointed commissioners disbanded. Shelter programs for the homeless and the mentally ill went underfunded, even as traditional state and federal funding for homelessness and mental illness continued to flow into county coffers.
So what we have learned in the last couple of months is that homelessness is a crisis.
An admission even the chairman of the County Board of Supervisors was forced to acknowledge under pressure from a federal judge.
Is at the end of the day, we are the lead agency that received federal and state funding. And we have to own up to that responsibility. And as I mentioned before, we probably could have done more in the past.
How and why did this happen? In one of the most prosperous counties, in the most economically robust state of the Union, in the very shadow of some of the happiest icons on the planet, the county's homeless had doubled in just a few short years. Police calls regarding the homeless tripled in cities like Fullerton and Anaheim. Hospital ER services to homeless increased fourfold, and then 10 cities of the displaced and disconnected began to appear along the Santa Ana Riverbed and at the Civic Center Plaza in the very shadow of county government. Lack of housing and disparity of income in OC were no doubt major contributors to the downward spiral of homelessness. It was estimated by a study in 2017 that over 10% of the employees of the largest employer of the county, Disneyland, were or had been at one time homeless. Fear was certainly another factor that bred hysteria about who these growing homeless among us were. And public fear fed the fires of increasingly aggressive law enforcement. The ratcheting up of criminalizing anti-camping ordinances
and I've been harassed by these police officers.
What were you doing when you got here?
I was resting. I was told that I could be on public sidewalk since I'm not allowed to be on private property. And they've been illegally telling me that if I don't leave, that I'll be arrested. And I told them that as long as a wheelchair can get through, I'm legal. And they've been doing this for the last few months, and they forced me over to the riverbed and have me all my stuff stolen. And then they're trying to get the people out of the riverbed once they get here. It doesn't make any sense. They're trying to make my life so miserable.
The riverbed was just the last resting place they found to lay their heads and their meager belongings down with some degree of peace. But in February of 2018, the coordinated efforts of county sheriffs, local PDs, probation, county health department, and public works formed a rolling phalanx that forced hundreds of homeless encampments off the riverbed in a final series of roll-ups. It all had begun really back in December of 2017 at the south end of the Santa Ana River in Fountain Valley, and culminated in February of 2018 in Anaheim. After several stops and starts and a couple of lawsuits challenging the legality and the brutality of local anti-camping laws, Federal Judge David Carter stepped in.
Yeah.
Tell me about your camp.
Okay.
Hi, I saw you out in the river, sir. It's nice.
and actually stepped onto
Tell me
the
about your
riverbed,
camp out.
seeking to broker what he called compassionate placement of as many riverbed homeless as possible into already burdened shelters and hastily arranged motel voucher stays. It was a hastily conceived and executed plan, brokered by Judge Carter himself, out on the riverbed in the night between county officials, lawyers, and homeless advocates.
Thank you very much.
Homeless advocate attorney Brooke Weitzman did her best to monitor the resulting eviction
You're an
process.
attorney, and you folks are monitoring, I guess, the situation out here as the homeless out here are being, well, what's the word, rolled up in a rather methodical manner out here today. How's it going as you observe it?
So there's a lot of disorganization and miscommunications among county agencies, and the harm is coming on the people out here. They are working hard to do what the court asked them to do, to be packed up and ready to go. Some, of course, have disabilities that affect how quickly they can do that. But they are all really excited. There have been lines for days waiting to get into motels, and the county just doesn't have the rooms. So first we have one agency saying, send everyone down to get their room, and another saying, but if they leave their stuff, we're going to take it. And a third saying, stay with your stuff and wait for us. So we really just don't have the county working together in a way that's going to protect these people and meet their needs. But hopefully, after they meet this afternoon, they'll do better, and if not, then we'll take it back to the judge.
Go guys, all right?
Yes.
Okay.
Shane, Reyes, Heather, Rubio,
Hey, Puss.
Baymont.
On February 26th, the last of the riverbed homeless were pressed into a small area behind the Honda Center where they were lined up, signed up, and herded off the riverbed by the busload. The last of those buses rolled off the riverbed and into the Motel Night, with most of the homeless cargo having no idea where they were going or what a motel voucher would mean to them. It would soon become alarmingly clear to many of them that there were motels, and then there were motels for the homeless. They were, in most cases, substandard motels, made worse with restrictions and limitations placed on the homeless tenants by fearful managers. In many cases, all furniture was stripped from the rooms except for a bed. The TVs were removed or unplugged. Sometimes locks on doors were disabled and curfews imposed. To be sure, some toughed it out and made the most of their 30 days. Some could not even tolerate the confinement of four walls, and after a week or two quietly melted back into the streets. Many were isolated, lonely, and now separated from others they had known on the riverbed. cut off from whatever network of support they had on the riverbed, sometimes placed in strange motels as far away as San Clemente or Cyprus. Often they would receive less than 24 hours' notice informing them that for inexplicable reasons they were being moved to another motel. There was little to do but wait for the knock on the motel door from county contracted services, who came less and less and brought fewer and fewer services as motel days wore on.
They came down to the riverbed with the sheriffs and all that. They said, we're not going to leave you on the cold. We're going to help you. It's going to take time, but yeah, that was their presentation, but look at it now. It's like the CityNet and Telecare when we first started. They would come out and give myself a $75 card and a bus pass or two. Now they're down to giving 7 bus passes, a Walmart card for $25, and this is what, and I don't even get this. I don't get none of this. A sandwich, a Capri Sun juice, a Nature Valley Bar Crunchy, and a bag of chips. That's supposed to be for her meal once a day.
And for many of the riverbed refugees who were promised that the motels would be a pathway to services that would take them out of poverty, it didn't take long for them to see through that one.
Orange County Interfaith Shelter has been closed for 2 years. Precious Life Shelter is no longer accepting anyone, and it only accepts pregnant women with no children. Lastly, which was my favorite program, years ago, the Salvation Army Hospitality House. They accepted women, children, families, men, and you could stay for 2 weeks at a time. They only accept men now. They don't accept women. There's no option. Toby's house only accepts pregnant women. I actually went to Toby's house a long time ago when I was pregnant. All of these are closed or not accepting any people because they don't have any funding. There's no option. I called every single one on this list. And when I explained this to HCA and to CityNet, they just kept saying, well, you have to keep trying. You have to keep trying. There's no trying to get into help from a closed facility. There's no trying to get help from a place that doesn't have the funds to help you.
There were at least 2 shelter options at this time that were available to most of the riverbed homeless, now huddled up in motels. And healthcare workers and placement agencies tirelessly promoted them. The Courtyard in Santa Ana and Bridges at Kramer Place in Anaheim were set up rapidly as mass emergency triage centers, really. Not exactly embraced by the homeless at first, though lacking other options, they soon were filled to capacity and beyond.
So tell me, what did happen to you after they rolled you up on the riverbed?
What happened? They put me in a motel for a month and a half. Now they got me at the Baymont, and Baymont is trying to kick me out of there this Wednesday, and I can't go to certain places, and I hope to God that they don't send me to the Courtyard. I can't live in those situations.
What's the problem with the Courtyard?
Too many people. I can't be around a lot of people. I got to be by myself, because you know what? I feel if I'm around a lot of people, I don't want to hurt nobody. You know what I mean? And I separate myself from that today to try to do that, and I don't know where I'm going. And they're kicking me out of Baymont this Wednesday. I don't know where I'm going.
Courtyard, a converted bus terminal turned triage center that nobody bothered to put walls around, or indeed indoor plumbing for that matter. It's a dark, open-air affair designed for 350 temporary homeless, now accommodating an overflow homeless population of almost 500. And maybe your dog, if you must have one. A cot and 3 square meals, and not much else in terms of amenities. Most of the homeless yanked off the riverbed and through the county's system of motel musical chairs still preferred Courtyard as a shelter to the confines of Kramer Place, a converted industrial warehouse off the 91 freeway, completely enclosed and secured by armed guards, the gated entrances always closed. A military barracks-like environment inside, bunks stacked too high, with most of your earthly belongings hanging from whatever bedpost you could find. And outside, two large military tents take up most of the internal yard area. No one enters or exits Kramer without written permission, and the only way out is to be shuttled out.
What the county's doing, which I think is just...
In a recent walkthrough of the county's Kramer facility, Supervisor Todd Spitzer called this mass shelter concept the preeminent model for future shelters across the county.
This model is the model that I think needs to be replicated in other locations throughout the county.
But the Kramer model isn't the only working option for housing the homeless of Orange County. There are some homeless cases the county calls special circumstances who have fared better than the great majority of refugees now going from motel to shelter. Veterans, for example, for whom there are a number of innovative housing initiatives, like this one in Midway City that converts old cargo bins to studio apartments, with on-site services available. Such small-scale coordinated care facilities do succeed at getting the homeless off the streets and keeping them off. County officials even have a term for it: Continuum of Care, and it's supposed to be the standard by which all the county's homeless are provided graduated services and a real path of care back to productive lives. But few of those from the riverbed have seen anything close to real care, let alone a continuum of it. A system-wide ramp-up of supportive services and housing is coming, so says new county homeless czar Susan Price.
The board has put a lot of pressure on the system, the courts put a lot of pressure on the system, and we're moving very quickly to achieve all of these great things. And so,
along with new money to fund it. The question is, where were those service programs all these years, and the money that flowed from the state to fund them, before the county's homeless spilled out into 10 cities on the riverbed? And where are those programs and the funding for them now, for homeless refugees still held up in dingy motels and mass shelters, waiting for something like humane housing and supportive services? Executive Director of Children's Causes OC, Michael Arnott, is asking that question too, along with State Mental Health Fund auditors.
I think that has been the case in the past, and I think that's how we got in the situation we are. As the state auditor pointed out on February 27th in her report, Orange County is the second largest accumulator of what the state audit report referred to as excessive MHSA fund balances. That accumulation of excessive fund balance occurred under the watch of this mental health board, the board that has responsibility for oversight. Mm-hmm. And so...
Good morning, Madam Chairman, Supervisors.
Good morning.
My name is Tim Houchin. I appreciate some of the efforts that the supervisors have made in the past, but I'd like you to understand that that it's just not enough. When we can drive down southbound 57 freeway, and we can see, we can almost reach out and touch visible homelessness, and all that we've done, we've seen an increase over the years. We need to be able to provide this supportive housing and affordable housing in general for our homeless. So that's what's really going to reduce the visible homelessness that we see.
They've been criminalized off the streets, bounced from the riverbed, ping-ponged through the motel maze, stripped of their personhood and denuded of their possessions along the way, and then deposited into a mass shelter like Courtyard or Kramer, and told it's all part of the plan. Others are not waiting any longer for the county to come to their rescue anytime soon. They are quietly packing up what they have left and going back to the streets, maybe elsewhere in the county or even out of state. More of them than county officials would like to admit. It's not in most cases that they don't want a place to call home, they say. It's just that they've seen this movie before, and they know how it ends. Okay, well, that's our intro to our discussion today with two guests that I'm pleased to have in studio with me that, as a matter of fact, were out there on the riverbed through the motel system. I was out there. I saw them out there too, and I'm pleased to have them with me today. I'm talking about Nick Gerda from Voice of OC and his associate, Spencer Custodio,
yes,
also staff writer and reporter for Voice of OC. Happy to have you both here today and help me unpack what we just saw and elaborate on it. And by all means, if I go off in the weeds somewhere, let me know. Certainly there's nobody in this county that has a complete understanding of what just happened these last few months out there on the riverbed and through the motel process. But we're going to make a stab at trying to understand it today with two people here in the studio that I know were there and can speak to it as good as anyone in the county. So with that said, where do we begin, gentlemen? My sense is I want to begin on the riverbed with those folks that did not understand what was happening to them. I think that was the message that I got from the riverbed. In most cases, they just didn't understand what was happening to them. And a motel, well, what does that mean? You know, and well, in a lot of cases, it wasn't what they thought a motel voucher meant. But let's wind it back a little bit to the just in the first few days before the riverbed, before the roll-ups began. Of course, this was announced early on. I recall as early as September of 2017. I believe it, Sean Nelson, district supervisor for North County, speaking before a group of folks at the Phoenix Club, was holding forth and telling them that this in fact was going to take place. And even at the time chided the county, and he didn't really understand why it hadn't taken place up until that point, or at least that's what he said.
Obviously this deserves an answer. I would like the answer to be a little quicker. I've lost that vote so far. I'm big enough to keep in the fight. I don't think it's because the people that share the ability to vote with me are bad folks. They're not seeing the vision, they're not interested in the political fight, whatever the issue is. But right now it's not there. I wish it was, because I think we could do a lot of good and have already done it. And again, that doesn't make me a better person, and I'm not looking to escape any scars from anybody, because hey, I would have fixed it, but go easy on me, beat them up. I don't like that this problem has gotten as bad as it has. I don't like, and I'm embarrassed that our county hasn't done more sooner. We should have, and we could have. And anyone that says otherwise is not being honest. It's not because we have a couple $100 million. I don't try to apologize.
Let's talk about the riverbed.
Yeah, there was several months, some would argue years, of lead up essentially to what we saw at the riverbed. Homelessness, as many people know, has been a growing issue across California, particularly in places like Los Angeles, Orange County, San Diego County, San Francisco. We've seen through the data and the surveys and the counts, the annual or semi-annual point-in-time counts, steadily growing rates of homelessness and numbers of people on the street. In Orange County, the number of unsheltered homeless people went up by about 40% in the 4 years before the latest count in January 2017. So it's become much more visible as well at the riverbed. You saw more and more people camping along the riverbed, very visible right in front of Angel Stadium where the Angels play, and in front of the Honda Center where the Anaheim Ducks play. and right along the 57 freeway, where many thousands of residents drive to and from work each day. So the public awareness and consciousness of the problem and of the growing homelessness has been growing and kind of led up to this point at the riverbed where the county cleared it out. The dynamics of why people ended up at the riverbed, as described in lawsuits and by people at the riverbed, was that the 34 cities of Orange County essentially have anti-camping laws on the books, anti-loitering laws, where police officers would tell homeless people that if they did not pack up and leave that city, they would be subjected to a citation and possibly an arrest for camping in public. The allegation in lawsuits and from homeless people at the riverbed was that the police officers at the cities would tell them, we will cite you and arrest you if you keep staying in the city, but if you move to the riverbed, you will not be subjected to that kind of enforcement. So that's the story of the narrative of why people ended up at the riverbed. And certainly many of the police agencies themselves have acknowledged many years of jurisdictional finger-pointing over who has law enforcement jurisdiction at the riverbed. You had the sheriff's department saying it was up to the cities in that area to enforce the law, and the cities saying it was up to the sheriff's department. And the cities being predominantly Anaheim, Orange, Santa Ana, and Fountain Valley were the main cities that where these homeless camps popped up in the riverbed. So a lot of finger pointing, and then last summer, in the summer of 2017, there was growing news coverage of the issue, growing discussions by elected officials, and these jurisdictional issues being highlighted, and very clearly the County Board of Supervisors wanted to see these camps cleared out, no longer on this county property along the riverbed. They cited health concerns, public safety concerns, and began a process to prepare to clear out the riverbed. And that ended up, they started in Fountain Valley with an encampment of about 100 people there. That was back in October, November time frame. But what ended up happening is they cleared out that camp, but the question was, where do people go from there? Many of those folks relocated up to the main camp near Angel Stadium, and the population of that camp swelled from anywhere from 400, 500 to potentially even larger. It's hard to get clear numbers, but there were several hundred people at that camp, and ultimately the county set a deadline of late January 22nd, 23rd, somewhere in there, for people to have to leave under threat of arrest if they did not leave. Now, the county did proceed giving people lots of warning, lots of notice, but the reality remained that there was very few beds available in the shelter system for people to go to. And so the dynamic as described by Supervisor Nelson that you referenced from back in the fall was that if the county proceeds with evicting the riverbed camp, you will essentially have hundreds of homeless people fan out into the cities and sort of inundate local cities due to a lack of available shelter space. That sort of dynamic prompted attorneys Brooke Weitzman, who was in your video piece, and Carol Sobel to file a federal lawsuit in Santa Ana that alleged that the county was essentially going to create an unconstitutional violations of people's rights, their civil rights, by pushing them into cities where they'd be subjected to anti-camping laws with no alternative of a place to go. And they rested their case, or they relied on a Ninth Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals decision called the Jones decision that was based out of L.A. and said that the city of L.A. could not criminalize sleeping in public, homeless people sleeping in public, if they did not have an alternative place for homeless people to go, like in the shelter, that was unconstitutional, cruel, and unusual punishment.
Well, an excellent thumbnail to start us off with the show. That was great. But what do you make of one of the gentlemen in the B-roll, what we just saw, making the claim that it was no accident that so many people homeless throughout the city were being pushed into the riverbed, and that in fact it wasn't just he makes the insinuation that it wasn't just a haphazard move by each city law enforcement agency. It was a coordinated move, he felt, even at the county level, to push people into the riverbed. And he later said in that interview to create a kind of a conflict zone that then they therefore could justify mass movement of these people. Do you see, I mean, I had a number of people tell me that on the riverbed. Spencer, you were out there on a daily basis out there. Did you hear that same chatter from people
I've heard,
that, hey, they told me to come here? And
yeah, I've heard that same chatter, whether it's a coordinated effort by these different cities. And if you add up all these stories individually, you know, you hear all these stories individually and you add it up, there's always one common theme. You know, I tried to stay at this park or somewhere in this city, and, you know, the local PD, whether it was Orange, Anaheim, Buena Park, wherever, right? Mostly North County. I mean, I didn't run into anybody from South County there. But mostly all these homeless people from North County just getting cited, you know, for sleeping on the streets or sleeping in the parks. And, you know, it was pretty much understood amongst the homeless, and I'm sure you, through your interviews, they, you know, there's a lot of talk, all right? Information spreads really quick, and, you know, they all started to realize I can go to the riverbed. While it might not be the perfect place or the cleanest place, you know, the sheriffs, they'll just come by, but they're not going to cite me, or, you know, more or less I get to stay there as opposed to, you know, this park or, you know, behind this school or wherever it may be. So as far as it being a concerted effort by the cities and, you know, the county to place everybody there intentionally, I don't see evidence of that. But I think
it has the same effect essentially, whether it was coordinated or not.
Yeah, whether it was coordinated or not, you know, just through these no camping and anti-loitering laws, it kind of had that effect because, and it was brought up in the court hearing, and I think, I can't remember, but Nick's probably more well-versed in this, there was jurisdictional question of who enforces that on the riverbed. Was it Anaheim PD? Was it Orange? I mean, because you had
the Sheriff's Department.
The Sheriff's Department, the riverbed, the encampment, it started at Taft Road, or yeah, Taft Avenue / Ball Road, and went south all the way until the 22 freeway. So you had to get 3-mile stretch. I mean, they weren't camping on the side of the Arctic right there, but after you go underneath the 57 and you're behind Angel Stadium at that point, then that camp stretches all the way till the 22 freeway.
Yeah. And then out further across the railroad tracks that
yeah, a little bit
that cross over the freeway.
And yeah, at one time they had stayed on, get my bearings here, the east side of the riverbed, but they were moved to the west side.
Yeah, now that's an interesting
and that
can of worms. Let's look at that for just a second. You say it may have been just individual efforts, non-coordinated, but each of the cities having the same sense that they could send people to the riverbed and diffuse their own homeless population within their cities.
In fact, they may not, whether or not the cities even told people to go to the riverbed, you had the effect of the city anti-camping and anti-loitering laws being a deterrent of homeless people remaining in cities. And so the riverbed essentially became the place of least resistance, the funnel where people ended up going.
But then the county makes a move to take all of those people who had been on the east side of the riverbed, living in the shadow, if you will, of the 57 freeway, living pretty comfortably over there without much altercation. And suddenly the county says, oh, well, now look, we're going to take all of you and put you on the west side, right across the river, and put you right underneath several new developments that just went, private home developments and apartment developments on the west side of the riverbed, right underneath, literally underneath their balconies, and which created, one could say, a kind of a conflict zone. I mean, one could certainly see that coming. And in fact, what was it, the Portofino Apartments that were right along Chapman there, and a very beautiful new apartment development. They, in fact, immediately put a petition together to have them removed from the west side of the riverbed, having just been removed from the east side where the county then dumped riprap, along there, so nobody could encamp there anymore. So what do you make of that move? That was by the county.
In terms of the effect of it, there was certainly a lot of frustration by the residents of those apartments. They talked about needles and feces and a lot of impact and fires being set on the camp right next to their homes. So they were they started getting organized, started petitioning the Board of Supervisors, and Judge Carter later on cited those very real issues that were faced by those residents there. What appeared to have been taking place is the county this is the earlier stages, a year or so before the full eviction happened at the Riverbed. So this was kind of early in the process of the county.
In 2017.
In 2017, sort of attempting to declare certain areas no-go zones for homeless people by replacing, requiring people to leave, saying this was a maintenance project for storing flood control materials like dirt and rocks, and then requiring them to leave there. And then by default, people moved over to the west side, and it did have an effect of concentrating homeless people on that west side. It was much more dense on that side, and then in addition, you had more and more people coming to the camp from other parts of the county. Period, and just the numbers started escalating, and this camp, I rode my bike along the riverbed a couple years ago, and it was just a smattering of tents here and there. But this camp really grew to hundreds and hundreds of people in a pretty dense area there. It was essentially tent to tent to tent to tent. Sort of a lawless environment, very dense, and this was essentially the funnel where the homeless people from across the county have sort of ended up by default through the enforcement of these laws in the cities, with very, very little capacity available in the shelters, in programs for people to.
But doesn't it seem like the county could have anticipated that kind of pushback from the local community when you put all these homeless people on one side of the riverbed with nothing but a freeway to oppose them, which you could hardly even see them from the 57 freeway, and then take them from the east side of the riverbed, put them on the west side of the riverbed where they are literally underneath apartment balconies? Seems like a very imprudent, at the very least, thing to do, wouldn't you think?
Not my place to say if it was prudent or not, but I think the county believed that it was a problem, that there was this sort of large homeless camp on their property, and the public safety issues that it created. But I'll leave it to others to decide what was prudent or not.
Okay, but the west side of that riverbank was county as well as the east side.
Yeah, county flood control property. Yeah.
Well, I think what I want to try and do is I want to go back onto the riverbed. I think the most valuable thing that we can impart to folks watching the program here is most people in the county do not know what the riverbed was about, what happened out there. You almost had to have been there to see what was happening out there. What was, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And of course, there was all of the above out there, as in any social arrangement. Spencer, you were out there on almost a daily basis.
When they first started doing the evictions, January 21st, they told me, and, we'd seen the signs out there for a month or so, give or take.
A few weeks, yeah.
About a few weeks, saying, hey, today, January 21st, 22nd, late January, we're gonna expect you to move. The county is gonna expect you to start packing up and moving. And the first day the sheriffs went through, they just basically told people, hey, as long as you're making progress, start packing your stuff up. We know it's not, we understand that you're not gonna get it done in a day or two.
Right.
They started doing that, but then within a week on the day, I believe, exactly a week, that's when the lawsuit was filed by Brooke Weitzman and Carol Sobel.
On behalf of Elder Law and Disability Rights Center, they had gotten the memo that this was going to be, as you mentioned, soft roll-up. Nevertheless, it did not go smoothly once it went. And I'll give you a couple of examples. We have a little bit of footage of one gentleman, Josh, if we could roll that footage, the first clip there, Jeffrey. Josh, tell me what just happened to you.
I rolled up and they were just completely trashing the place. They were throwing everything they could away that wasn't within reach. And I asked to get my backpack, pointed at it. They looked at it and grabbed it and tossed it at somebody, and then into the trailer it went.
So what was in your backpack?
Personal belongings like another cell phone, clothing, my EBT card, my wallet with my ID, and some cash, and a couple bottles of water.
So you had just walked up. Did they think it was abandoned?
No, I mean, when I left, I just left to go to the store to get some smokes, and there was 4 people there. So I think they rolled up and kicked everybody out and then started collecting everything. That's what I'm about to find out, so.
Do you expect to get any of that back?
Probably not, because it was in the dumpster and they told me to get out of there. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
These were public works people.
Yeah, the police themselves.
Okay. Well, that's, of course, anecdotal. It's one guy's story. Spencer, you must have interviewed hundreds of people out there on the riverbed. What is your sense about how the eviction process went?
At first, okay, so first they were going and doing the soft enforcement, right, like we just talked about. And then the lawsuit was filed. And then for a few days, there was the probation and parole department out there with them. Okay. And I forget the numbers, but we had the public records of, how many people had violated probation or parole on the riverbed. The violations weren't clear, so, I don't know if it was just being on the riverbed itself a violation, or they had missed a court date, or, whatever it was. So that kind of thinned out, some of the numbers of the camp. But then Judge Carter stepped in and issued that restraining order, basically. He issued an injunction, and so it was going back and forth. And Nick remembers this a lot clearer than I do on some of the stipulations, what you're going to provide to these people if you're going to kick them off the riverbed, which essentially is you're going to have to give them a place to go.
Right. Yeah, Spencer is definitely on the ground, checking out the situation firsthand. In terms of the court process, after the lawsuit was filed, Judge Carter set a hearing for February 13th in federal court in Santa Ana, and the county had agreed not to carry out the actual eviction, not to arrest anyone until that date. And what ended up, or at least either the county agreed to that, or Judge Carter told the county, made clear to the county he expected them to not actually arrest anyone until the first hearing took place on February 13th. What ended up happening is the county lawyers, in advance of that, a week before that first hearing, told the homeless people's lawyers that they were going to be arresting people the next day, the next morning. This was about a week before that first hearing. And Carol Sobel and Brooke Weitzman, the lawyers for homeless people, within an hour or two had filed an emergency request with Carter to halt, to get him to issue an order, to request an order from him, immediately halting any county arrests of people for being at the riverbed until the hearing took place. And Carter that evening issued a temporary restraining order, not allowing the county to arrest people until the first hearing took place on February 13th. And a lot took place on that day once Judge Carter got everyone into court. But ultimately, the brief summary of that is this process that Spencer referred to was set up whereby Judge Carter said, I'm going to lift my restraining order against the evictions the following week, but there needs to be a place for people to go so that they're not simply put back into the cities where they would then be arrested, cited for essentially being homeless, sleeping in the streets when there's perhaps not adequate shelter available for them to go to as an alternative.
And that's when Andrew Doe stepped up with did it start 400 beds, a few hundred beds at first, motel beds. They had went back, and him and county lawyers spoke in the lawyers' chambers, right, if I remember that correctly. But he came back and said, you know what, we can get a few hundred beds. And that's where the whole, there's not enough shelter space either at Kramer or the courtyard or, anywhere else the county can try to put people. So that's when they started really rolling out, this idea of motels. And what started at a 300 or 400 number, quickly turned into about 700.
700. Yeah, the numbers on that were ultimately 700 people moved in a series of period of days, maybe a little bit over a week of that process, moved from the riverbed camps into motels. By the end of that process, 30 days later of the motel stays, 30 days after the motel stays began, about 600 people remained in motels, and about 550 of those had done health assessments with the county that was supposed to determine where they would go next, whether it's mental health beds or drug treatment beds or county shelter, etc. And that was another key part of the process that Carter sort of nudged the county to do, is have mental health assessments of the people at the riverbed to see what kinds of health services, particularly mental health and drug treatment, people
You
should
mean
be
mental assessments
offered.
before they ever came off the riverbed?
It was typically at the motels, I believe. So once people got into the motels, there were mental health workers from the county that were doing assessments.
The riverbed assessments were basically just like a kind of a quick check.
Yeah.
Was my understanding of it. It wasn't like a full mental health, evaluation or anything. But once they got to a more stable environment, the motels, they were given a better understanding.
And there was some
thorough check.
Anecdotal complaints from some of the homeless people that these mental health assessments, at least the first round of assessments at the motels, were either cursory, just a few minutes without very detailed questions of people's conditions, that the workers, that the county had not pulled their medical records to see what previous diagnoses they had, and that some of the interviews were being done in hallways where other people could overhear it, and there may not have been the privacy that was expected of these kinds of sensitive health discussions.
Right.
From what I remember, the county didn't directly respond to those concerns and complaints, but there were another round of assessments done later.
Yeah. Well, I kind of don't want to leave the riverbed just yet.
No, yeah.
But we'll get to the motels in more depth in a few minutes. But I think there's more to say about the riverbed process itself and what went right and what went wrong, despite the restraint that I acknowledge county officials, especially Sheriff's Department, exhibited. But in terms of the actual process of moving people off the roof, that was pretty much left up to some contractors, CityNet, and under the CEO Brad Fieldhouse. And I interviewed Brad on the riverbed, as a matter of fact. Can we pull up that little piece of clip on the CEO of CityNet, Brad Fieldhouse?
When we did our initial census, we identified 422 non-duplicative individuals that were out here. And in our conversations with them, when we were saying, hey, would you be willing to work with us as we help you try and navigate through the system that does exist, making sure that you can navigate all the different ins and outs. Over 80% of the people said they would absolutely be interested in getting help through this system. And that has been our experience ever since the beginning. So that doesn't mean that it's easy. That doesn't mean that solutions come quick. Doesn't mean the options we have for them are in their interest, honestly. And so part of it is just that navigation of trying to kind of line up people with existing resources, make sure the existing system works efficiently to the degree that it can.
So the riverbed was the first order of screening, and as Brad Fieldhouse says, many of the people on the riverbed, most of them in fact, were happy and willing to comply and get some egress off the riverbed, as it turns out. But the process itself, having seen it on the riverbed and followed Brooke, for example, Brooke Weitzman, the attorney, she had her hands full, trying to represent clients on the riverbed who had lost their goods.
She was in effect representing 400 or 500 people there.
Sadly, and I'm sure she paid for that emotionally as well. But there were other people on the riverbed too that just came in and helped. And I'm thinking of one gentleman who brought his wherewithal, pastor at the Rock Church, Pastor Don, I believe. And we have a little clip of Pastor Don, so before we get into that, I'd like to just show you one of whom I think was a hero of the riverbed, Pastor Don from the Rock Church. Let's roll that Pastor Don footage.
So your strategy is basically getting people's belongings, perhaps all they have in this world, secure somehow, somewhere, and then deal with their personal issues.
Yeah, so they could think clearly. So I feel it, and seeing what happened in Fountain Valley, they get overwhelmed. As the time comes, they all hope that the filing of injunctions and a restraining order will happen. But we need to have an exit plan, because we don't know for sure what's going to happen. So if they can think clearly, have their personal belongings in a safe area, then that they'll be able to think clearly. And if an exit plan comes and they want to choose to go to emergency shelter or a shelter program or be reunited with their family, it's going to be a lot easier for them to make that decision.
All right, so that was Pastor Don from The Rock, actually a volunteer organization that had not been contracted by the county, but was there, as many other religious organizations were there also on the site. But the county was involved too.
Very much so. They were essentially the party whom Judge Carter was holding responsible for how this process was unfolding at the Riverbed. And they ultimately, the contractors work for the county mental health workers, the county health department, sheriff's department is within the county structure, public works. CityNet is a contractor of the county. So the county, in many ways, and we can get to this later, but they are the top of the food chain, if you will, of all the different law enforcement and health and mental health services or lack thereof that are provided to homeless people at the Riverbed.
Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the fact that despite the county's involvement, despite a prolific volunteer presence, wouldn't you say?
There was quite a few volunteers. I can't remember them all, but like you said, there was numerous faith-based organizations out there, churches, synagogues, mosques, and just people who had been reading it or watching it on the news, because all the local TV stations were down there, so they were showing up, especially on the weekends when I'd go down there, because a lot of people work Monday through Friday, right? And they were down there pulling around, coolers full of water, pre-made sandwiches, and just passing them out, and they weren't with any particular group. And I would hear often that, hey, I've seen this on TV, or I read about it in, the local papers, and I just feel like I need to come down and try to help during all of this.
I saw a lot of that too. And we shouldn't let the moment pass without mentioning the yeoman work that this Camp Hope did, a completely volunteer organization put together by a gentleman worked for a technical advisor for a television station, just out of the own impulse of his heart, and put together several volunteers to go down and put up a tent. They called it Camp Hope. We have a little picture of it, and they put it together and literally became a wayfaring station for homeless to get not just foodstuffs and connections for Wi-Fi and so forth, but information about what was coming. And in fact, the Sheriff's Department worked fairly closely with Camp Hope. So many organizations and many good hearts coming together, well-meaning, to try and make this happen. It didn't all go well. However, a number of people did not fare well from the riverbed. Some of them immediately left the riverbed to then melt back into the cities and across the railroad tracks and under the bridges again. Some made an effort to move off the riverbed. Some were just could not get out of law enforcement's way fast enough. I'm thinking of one individual in particular that was continually confronted by law enforcement. Not sure exactly the reason why. He had some ideas of his own. You recall M.J. Deal, a gentleman who lived on the riverbed for what did he say, 9 years, something like that, or 5 years?
He'd been homeless for about 9 years, I want to say. I don't have my notes, but it's been some time. He was on the riverbed for about 3.
Yeah. Tragic case of a guy who came home one night, interrupted a home invasion robbery and was shot in the head. And of course, his life went south.
He was a former, he had former deep underwater construction, basically go down and weld pipes and kind of stuff for drilling operations.
So he was a very
work.
skilled and very well-paid individual whose life ended up on the riverbed. MJ Deal, since we're talking about him, shall we roll a little clip, clip 8, MJ on the riverbed? How many law enforcement personnel actually approached you yesterday at your tent site?
About 14.
Do you feel like you were singled out for some reason?
I've been singled out quite a bit for being one of the speakers at the Board of Supervisor meetings. That's what started my trickle downhill. And for being in the newspaper.
And yesterday's altercation where they took you out of here with armed law enforcement. The first example of that violation, or one in a string of violations?
One of the strings. The first violation was the first encounter with the law enforcement after I did my meeting with the Board of Supervisors, where I was the very first speaker. Some time back I was stopped by police and I was incarcerated, and when I asked for why I was incarcerated, they said it was for resisting arrest. I was never told I was under any arrest, and I was physically assaulted then. I had a seizure in their jail, and I ended up having to plead guilty to charges in order to get out on the outside to see my doctor. Their doctor inside the jail told me I needed to drink more water.
So what's your plan today? This one day later with all of your gear and your life's possessions somewhere.
I just want to find my pill, and I'll do a little bit of what he said. I'll drink a little water with it.
Okay, well, one story, one case, one incident on the riverbed. Were there others like him? Were there other MJs on the riverbed that you saw, Spencer, that you interviewed, that were able to talk to at least in depth to know something about their story?
In terms of interaction with law enforcement,
yeah, right. Having that kind of negative interaction.
I mean, naturally, you know, when you're in that kind of a situation, and don't get me wrong, the riverbed, it was a community. You know, the north side was completely different from the south side.
Yeah.
You know, the Angel Stadium side was different from the rest of them. Yeah.
You're very right about that. Each section of the camp seemed to have its own flavor, its own community makeup. Some sections were, you know, very accommodatable to women.
Mm-hmm.
Some sections it was very dangerous to be a woman alone out there. I'm reminded of an interview that I did with. Do you remember little Debbie out on the river with the bicycle? And
did she have her tent by the Big A?
Yeah.
Yes, I remember
Right.
Debbie. I forget her last name, but I remember Debbie.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's refresh your memory, because we've got a little clip of Debbie, just very short little clip. Can we play that clip, number 5 of Debbie, for Spencer? Did you ever think you would be here?
No. I'm sorry. And I have spoke to other people. You asked me a year ago, 10 years ago, 40 years ago. I never thought I would be homeless. You know, I speak to people all the time, every day, and some people aren't very nice. And I just say, you know what, don't say anything, because you never know whether you'll be here or not.
Right.
And that is the truth. I have never thought, I was in professional business, my employment, and, you know, I did work for the government. I never thought that I would be in this position.
Well, yeah. Another story. Debbie, very successful aerospace industry, I believe, and things. She got sick. Things went down, down, down for her, and some of her family members turned on her because she was the breadwinner, and resented her for her not, you know, being able to fulfill that role. And one thing led to another. She ended up on the riverbed. Which is unfortunate. I guess that could happen to just about anybody. Did you get the sense out there who some of these people were, that they were in fact just people that had hit the skids, were hitting hard times?
There was, I run into a few former foster kids out there who didn't want me to use their name. I remember that because they were in between jobs and they were working temp jobs, and they didn't want their name to hit the paper, and they didn't want their employers knowing that they're sleeping on and off at the riverbed. So here's what a lot of them would do, especially a lot of the younger cats working, the former foster kids or just younger people who, don't have a physical or mental disability. They would stay on the riverbed in between stays at motels, right? I forget the going rate for a weekly stay at a motel, but when you're working at a temp job for $12, $13 an hour, it's not enough to get like a full month at a motel. And so they'd stay on the riverbed for a week or two, they get paid and save everything up and go stay at the motel, and then they'd come back. And I was there long enough to see that cycle happen a couple times for them and interview the same younger people. And then you had your...
so you had, those were the commuter riverbed people, I guess.
Yeah, I guess you could say that. And then you had your of course, elderly, like Debbie, the older people out there, different disabilities. You had people in wheelchairs, you had people not sure how they lost their limbs, but they, missing a leg below the knee, or an arm or something, and then people battling substance abuse, alcohol abuse. You had just anything normal swath, like a city, right? You take just a city as a whole, that every issue that city's facing, you just apply it to the riverbed, and that's pretty much what was there.
Yeah, I've heard that before.
And you'd seen a kind of a rougher section of the...
And and I also wanted to get into that. The north section was more the elderly. That was where Camp Hope was, over by the Honda Center, the north side of the camp, from Catella to Ball Road / Taft Avenue. Yeah. That stretch was the most peaceful section of the camp. Really, it was mostly the elderly. There was some self-admitted drug users there. I didn't see a heck of a lot compared to the south side. I did run into a couple self-admitted heroin addicts, Jeff and I forget his buddy's name, I think it was Bob. But they pretty much just stuck to themselves. They were a good source of information of what's going on. One of the guys, Jeff, told me he fell into it because he had injured his sciatic nerve on a construction job, wasn't able to work, and got hooked on painkillers, pain pills, and they just kind of fell into a heroin addiction, he said. Yeah. And then you had your middle section of the camp, which was by Angel Stadium. It starts getting a little rougher over there. You could tell when somebody's got prison tattoos. You got your different gang tattoos on there, and then you get to the south side, the south section of the camp. That was the roughest of it.
The south side.
Yeah, that was where most of the drug use was happening.
And give me some streets.
South side, that would be
Chapman.
South of Chapman, all the way up to 22.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, like the last segment of the camp. When I think of the camp, I always kind of broke it down into 3 different sections.
Right.
You had your north, which is like the Honda Center portion, running that too, and then you had your middle, which was from Catella down to about Chapman, and then from Chapman to like Memory all the way to the 5.
Yeah.
Or 22.
Okay. I guess the women were mostly concentrated in the middle section, would you say?
Middle and north.
Middle and north section.
The north of the middle.
Yeah.
And mostly in the north. They said, most of the women I spoke to there said that was, they felt safest in that part of the camp.
Yeah, and my observation was that I usually find them in 2s and 3s.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you found?
Yes, and again, they told me, all of them I talked to, they feel safer sticking together. And, a lot of the men in the central north part of the camp even commented on that. They're a lot safer up here, and, we kind of look after them. They stay together. They're not bothered as much.
Yeah. So it was, in a sense, a microcosm of society. They weren't all drug addicts, criminals, and mental defectives.
As you can see right now, it is pretty cleaned up. The county didn't pick up our trash for 5 days, so
So with this last Monday when they were supposed to come in and come through here, it looked a mess. It was a mess. And that's because the trash had built up and they hadn't come through to pick it up. And they did that on purpose. They did that to us in Fountain Valley as well, just to make us look like an eyesore. Because to me, it's just like a campground. That's what it feels like to me.
So you mentioned something about family. You have a kind of a family unit out here?
Absolutely.
Of support?
Yeah, absolutely. That's been my issue. That's been my experience out here is that even now, since we've just been here for 3 months, I feel like everybody here that we've met in Anaheim, which we were really, really hesitant in coming here because we were afraid of not being welcomed here, and it's been complete opposite of that. So it's been actually really nice. I consider everybody here my family. I've been really concerned about where everybody's going to go when they do come and make us leave. It's a really sad situation because no one knows where they're going.
Yeah.
I think at this point, let's move on to the motel environment. That's a very important part of all this. My reflection is that it was very thrown together. It was in fact an afterthought and imposed upon the county by the pressure brought to bear by Judge Carter. And
I don't know whether he specifically said that it had to be motels or not. The dynamic was the chairman of the Board of Supervisors, Andrew Doe, under pressure to find some place to put people, came back and proposed this
That's
this
probably
idea.
true, yeah. Anyway, motels became the exigency, the immediate solution for an immediate problem, which was getting where to put these people flooding off the riverbed. And as we saw, even they'd load buses up and take them off in buses. So the motels spread out all over the county. Not the best motels in the county, not 4-star motels.
I mean, not all of them were bad. Not all of them were great. It was a mix. From I drove to a few of them. You had a few Motel 6s, and my experience, Motel 6 always pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Then you had some of the ones, kind of the infamous ones on Beach Boulevard that kind of been known to attract drug problems. This is well before the county had put homeless people there, but they've always kind of been a problem for the local cities like Buena Park, Anaheim, for drug use. And some of those motels were used. And guys like even Al Ramirez, Joshua
Collins.
Josh Collins, Lou Noble, they were...
Advocates.
Yeah, the advocates over at Camp Hope. They were on the phone calling Brooke, people from the county. So it was just a patchwork of motels. So really, they weren't all bad. They weren't all great. It was just it was a patchwork of it. And like you said, all around the county, as far as south as San Juan Capistrano and as far north as Cypress.
Yeah. And there was at least one motel where there was a very tense and antagonistic relationship between homeless people and the management. And then another hotel where there was a very positive relationship between homeless people and the management. And the management would arrange meals and said they were having a good experience with it. So very much a nuanced, mixed picture.
It was a mixed bag of motels, as you might expect from a plan that was pretty hastily put together. Did either of you get as far south? Did any of you venture southward as far as San Clemente? There were actually people I talked to that had been bused all the way down to South County for some odd reason. I'm not sure why. Did either of you get down to South County, down to San Clemente to see some of those motels that were down there?
I didn't, but I do know that there were
Mm-hmm.
homeless folks moved down there, and that the community in San Clemente cited some problems that came of that. I haven't had a chance to check it out, but I do know that at least one of the motels was down there.
Yeah, I think there were a couple. Anybody venture a guess as to why they would take people and move them all the way to the other end of the county, the very most southern tip of the county?
As Brooke Weitzman once told me, I kind of just asked her about that while I was trying to figure out a bunch of things. She was basically saying, hey, wherever has room right now, whoever, whatever motel has room, that's where we're putting them. She's like, we'll kind of figure it out later. It was, let's get you in a room, make sure you don't go out on the streets during the eviction. You're not left out on the streets during this eviction of the riverbed, but let's get you a room, and then we can kind of talk about, okay, we can bring you up to, like, say we put you in San Juan Capistrano, Brooks, like we can get you from there at a later, a couple days later, and then bring you up closer to, all the services in Central County. where a lot of them have doctors or, you know, whatever they may have needed.
Yeah.
But basically, you know, when she was telling me we just need to get them in a room, not all the motels around there had openings.
Yeah.
And then a lot of them, you know, didn't want to participate in the program, you know, because it's a private business. So.
Yeah. Probably the saddest part about it all was that the folks I talked to said, yeah, I'm going to motel. I'm going to get, you know, services. I'm going to step up. And a lot of times those services just weren't there when they got there. Well, and in addition to that, some of these folks that were taken off the riverbed were pretty shell-shocked from the experience, even, you know, even though they were being brought to a motel, they seemed almost beyond even understanding what was happening to them. There were a couple of cases where interviews that I did where I talked to the people, and it just seemed to me they weren't even cognizant of what was being done on their behalf. I'm thinking of one lady that was at a Buena Park hotel, was placed at a Buena Park hotel straight off the riverbed. In fact, we have a little clip of her, and she agreed to be interviewed. Jeffrey, can we roll number 7, Amy?
I'm grateful, and I want to use the 30 days. I want to be somewhere, not nowhere. I'm going to, by actions and showing that I can be better with what they're giving me. And I appreciate it. Yeah. And she does too. She does too.
Now, there was a case of someone who probably never should have stepped foot on the riverbed in the first place. And, you know, some people are just not able to handle it. But I met others who really saw the motel period as a way to get a leg up, and really saw it as an opportunity. Quite a few of them, in fact. In fact, much less resistance to leaving the riverbed than I thought, you know, in my mind I would encounter. So there was a lot of acceptance, at least at first, of the motel process. Can I get your guys' assessment, just generally up front, what you thought of that whole process, the motel process, following the riverbed evictions across the county?
Sure. A lot of my sources used it as a way to, one of them put, Frank. Frank, I forget his last name, but he said basically, you know, give me a few days, I can get a shower, you know, it'd be a lot easier for me to, you know, land a job. He was already having some job interviews, he said, lined up. And, you know, I could have a shower, I'd go in there clean, I'm not carrying my backpack or having to stash it in the bushes somewhere, right? All his belongings. And within a couple weeks, the last time I talked to him, I mean, I wished I still had his new number, his old number changed or whatnot, but he had gotten a job at the Honda Center, actually, as a line cook for some of the big events. And, you know, he's starting to get some other jobs. The last time I talked to him, about a month and a half ago. I'm trying to get back in touch with him. But that's just one of the many stories. And Carter has even brought it up in a lot of the hearings. A lot of these people...
Judge Carter.
Judge Carter, yeah. Judge Carter, the federal judge overseeing the lawsuit, has brought it up a few times during the case. You know, look at how good the hotel did, and that was just with 30 days.
Right, he said that people applied to jobs, people got jobs as baristas, as cooks, got reunited with family. So he cited some anecdotal cases of people you taking that 30-day opportunity to stabilize, save money, get jobs, get in touch with family. We don't have a good accounting of what portion of the 700 people who relocated into the motels did get reunited with family, did get jobs, did apply for jobs, did get into mental health treatment, in that the county did not really track the outcomes of people after they moved from the motel to another location. So the county kept track of kind of where people were going initially, but not sort of the more detailed data on how many people got jobs, et cetera.
Right.
At least that's what they've represented to us. But certainly lots of anecdotal stories of people taking that opportunity to get their lives back on track. And on the flip side, a lot of people who have ended up back on the streets as well after the motel stays. So it's, again, very much a mixed bag. Some people did take that opportunity to try and turn their lives around and take a step towards employment and reuniting with family. Others have ended up back on the streets and in that cycle again of homelessness.
Well, is it your assessment? I take it both of you had some experience in the motels as well as what was happening on the riverbed, right?
Mostly Spencer.
Is it do you get the sense that the county had its act together?
There was no real tracking of progress or not as far as the county side, other than we were able to place them. But a lot of the people I talked to, it at least gave them a place to. And this is most of the motels. There's a couple different stories, subpar kind of conditions and stuff that I've interviewed, people staying at those kind of places. But for the most part, it usually goes something, I got a place to keep my head at night. And I don't have to worry about people, coming and taking my stuff or getting ticketed or, being very cold. This was during the winter months also. And also when they go out during the day, they don't have to worry about their stuff. They have a nice, secure place.
Sure.
And speaking with Patrick Hogan, who is kind of like an unofficial leader within the homeless community. He used to be a crane operator,
right.
But a back injury kind of prevents him from doing that right now. I think he's trying to get back into the union.
Yeah.
Last time I talked with him, and doing something else, but
For a
since
good
he hasn't,
writer too.
Yeah, he used to do the Riverbed Wash, which was a weekly. Was it a weekly? I think it was a weekly
Riverbed
newsletter
Watch,
that
yeah.
went up and down the Riverbed encampment while it was still there.
Yeah, we're going to take a look at Patrick in just a few minutes.
And anyways, he stays in touch with a lot of people in these different hotels.
Yeah.
And most of the stuff he's telling me about, and the people that he was able to connect me with, it gave him a chance to, keep their stuff somewhere and get back on track with either like their social caseworker, whoever might be on their Social Security case, because a lot of them are elderly and disabled, and they're trying to get their Social Security money or, things of that nature. And then on the flip side of that, there's some other motels that, I saw the pictures and was able to kind of look inside some of the rooms. It's just, really subpar.
Yeah.
It was kind of like those places that teenagers would just go party and thrash, right? When you're in high school, those are kind of like those places.
Yeah. But beyond the domicile itself, beyond the rooms themselves, and certainly it's got to be a step up to have your own room, as opposed to living on the dirt somewhere, for most people. But was the county there in a follow-up sense, do you feel? I mean, did you get the sense that the county was actively moving to provide services and make extended services and a means of getting a leg up beyond just four walls in a motel for those people?
From what I've heard, it was again a mixed bag where there were some mental health services offered for people with serious disabilities, but that the county essentially was having to very quickly scale up the services they were offering and did not have the staffing levels to do that. They did later on hire more mental health workers, et cetera, let out some contracts to expand their capacity, but essentially, and Supervisor's Chairman Andrew Doe has pointed to this, that the county system and the county workforce was just not equipped to deal with this quick escalation in providing services. And so there's a lot of scrambling, a lot of attempts to very quickly address that, but the staffing levels and the service levels, it took a bit to catch up with what the need was.
Okay.
And many advocates argue today that it's still far behind the need, and Supervisor Doe's talked about that as well, that there's still a long ways to go in terms of providing those services.
Well, I did make the effort to follow up, and it was difficult to do so once people were dispersed off the riverbed and shuttled off to various motels all over the county, as far away as San Clemente, as we said, and right here in Cypress. I tried to stay in contact with as many of them as I could to try and follow up and see just, were they getting those services? Were they getting a leg up?
Mhm.
Were they taking advantage of what was being offered to them even? And so I did a number of interviews of these folks, and I'm not going to, I've got 3 or 4 of them I could bring up, but let me just point out one that I think may be exemplary of some of those folks that were trying very hard to get services and utilize that 30 days, 60-day motel voucher to be able to lift themselves up out of their condition. And the person I'm going to call on is a lady by the name of Lisa Bell. Former resident of the Riverbed. You've been placed here at Studio 6 Motel for a period of time to, as I guess you understand it, to recuperate, to find a step up in that transition process. But you're about to face eviction even from here. Is that right?
Yes. I was given a notice yesterday, just handed to me at my door, saying that I had to be out today and I had nowhere to go. I am on what they call bridged housing, that they were supposed to put me up in a hotel and help me look for housing and have a safe place to stay until I could find a place to live. They were supposed to help me go look for places, supposed to help me find a place, transport me there or whatever. I've been moved from Motel 6 on Western Catella, where I never got a food voucher, nothing ever, to here 2 weeks ago where they said that they would help me. And I get a notice yesterday out of nowhere stating that I had to be out today. I called the phone number on the form that they gave me and they said, we're on our own. I asked for a supervisor and spoke to a woman named Rachel who said, with all due respect, it's not her issue. That whatever it says on the piece of paper is what goes. If CityNet decides they want to help me, that's fine, but their hands are tied, they're done. Whatever that paper says.
She didn't explain herself with the statement, it's not her issue?
She just said, with all due respect, it is not her issue. So it was basically, I was left on my own. I tried to contact anybody I could. I tried my caseworker at CityNet, who I know she exists because I've seen her a couple of times. I did get one of her assistants to call me back, and he basically told me the same thing, that he called over to where the paper was and spoke to Rachel, where they said there was nothing they could do for me. And I kind of caused a little bit.
Okay, well, we get the gist of that. I don't want to say that's everybody that I talk to in the motel maze.
A lot of
if you
different
will.
stories, yeah.
But I think that I heard enough of that story to think that maybe there was some dysfunction going on at the county level and with the contractors that were working with the county at the time, Telecare and CityNet, especially in places like the motel on Beach Boulevard in Buena Park that was once called Baymont, and they covered
their signs,
covered over the sign to hide it. But so many of them were like this, Lisa, I thought, where the motel was there, the walls were there, but the services were not. And that motel, did you ever go visit that motel?
I've visited a couple times.
Yeah, that motel.
I haven't actually gotten to check it out inside.
Yeah, they were not letting anyone in.
Yeah, I got to stand
yeah.
at the front.
Yeah, at some point, well, I did. I got inside and talked to a number of the folks that were there. In fact, one of them was an interview I did at the beginning in the B-roll that we saw in the beginning. The lady with the list of services that just weren't there, and and if you recall her comment, they told her, "Well, just keep trying." And she was someone who was very motivated and very clever, very smart. She had a lot of skills, and really should have been able to use the motel voucher system to be able to climb out of. So essentially what they're offering you
Is no help.
is
It's just
an
papers.
incarceration type of shelter.
Right. Here's a list of programs that are already closed. We just have to give this to you because by law we have to. So by giving this to you, we relinquish the reliability for having to take care of it. We're saying we did our job. Now it's your turn to do yours. But there's nothing to do with it. So it falls back on us where there's no resources to go to because they gave us a resource list of nothing. That it goes nowhere. but they have somehow legally done their due diligence by providing that information that's not even usable. Where do you go then?
There's one more big section of this that we need to talk about, and that is post-motel. Not that everybody is out of the motels yet. There's still some folks still remaining, but the big emphasis right now seems to be the shelters, the larger shelters, and what is happening between the cities politically and structurally. Everybody seems to be pointing a finger at everybody else as far as the cities are concerned. There are initiatives coming forward. Well, we saw Todd Spitzer, Supervisor Todd Spitzer, talking about at the walkthrough that we saw in the previous B-roll, talking about Kramer Place, the large industrial semi-sequestered facility, which is now housing about 200.
Or sheltering. Yep.
Yeah, sheltering 200. That's right. There's a difference. And wants to use that as the shelter model and reproduce that elsewhere across, as he said, as you heard him say, across the county. Does that seem to be the prevailing wind in among city and county officials in the county?
It's a mixed bag. You have some city officials that are looking at large facilities like Kramer or even larger. Santa Ana is looking at potentially a 700-bed facility, which is significantly larger than anything that exists in Orange County today. 700-bed shelter. And then you've got some city officials like the mayor of Lake Forest, Jim Gardner, who has a PhD in clinical psychology, who says that these large institutional type shelters are really not the best environment for people and can set people back in their pathway to getting off the streets. And he says we've basically, as a society, gone from large congregate care for orphans and for children towards smaller type settings. And so Gardner's been advocating a series of smaller shelters instead. Huntington Beach and Westminster have been proposing a smaller shelter. So there's definitely a mix of shelter approaches in terms of size. A lot of it comes down to location. You know, where is a site or multiple sites that are feasible for these cities to place a shelter and for the city councils to move forward with it and not face such substantial public opposition, public concern that effectively blocks the process.
Mm-hmm.
And what we had seen previously is the county at one point when the motel stays were about to end had proposed 3 shelters, larger shelters, in Irvine, Laguna Niguel, and Huntington Beach. And there was a very large public pushback against it. Lots of concerns about homeless people walking in and out, potential public safety issues in the surrounding neighborhoods and schools and whatnot.
And the cities pushed back themselves.
The cities
All 3
pushed
of
back.
them voted to pursue a lawsuit against the county.
Fight,
None of them actually filed
it,
anything. But
Mm-hmm.
I think Irvine might have filed, but nobody ever got served, is my understanding.
So there was definitely major pushback. And at the time, the county announced these plans, but did not have answers to the questions and the concerns that the public had about whether homeless people would be walking in and out of the proposed shelters, whether convicted sex offenders would be allowed or not. At the time, I was hearing from my county sources that they would not be allowing convicted sex offenders at the proposed shelters. Mm-hmm. And in fact, of the 700 some odd homeless people at the motels who would potentially be eligible for those shelters, the probation department said there was a total of 1 convicted sex offender. But a lot of the rhetoric and statements that were being made about these proposed shelters emphasized drug use, sex offenders, and the threats to the communities at one point. Or alleged threats to the communities at one point. Supervisor Spitzer went to a meeting, I believe in Irvine and also in Laguna Niguel, and was describing the homeless people who would potentially come to these shelters as sex offenders and drug addicts.
That's Lisa Bartlett's district, isn't it?
Yes, Laguna Niguel is Lisa Bartlett's.
She was also
district.
at that meeting.
She was at that meeting
I don't
as
think
well.
she probably was very happy about him holding
She and the rest of the board of
district.
supervisors made their displeasure very clear in the days that followed.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of fear and confusion about what these shelters would look like. The county was not answering the questions about that. And those proposals have been taken off the table. So from what I'm hearing and from my sources throughout government in Orange County is that there's the way that those 3 shelter sites, the Laguna Niguel, Irvine, Huntington Beach shelter proposals, went down back in March, April timeframe, maybe April.
Yeah, somewhere in April.
That it really was has served as a warning to a lot of the local officials that if they come forward with the shelter proposal without being able to answer the questions from the public and have a plan to lay out there, the shelter proposals may go nowhere. So that's part of where things stand at this point.
The county got served, to use your word, in April when that meeting went down, and everybody bussed in from Irvine, and there was a sort of a NIMBY invasion that descended upon the Civic Center, and in fact, we have let's play a little bit of that, just a little bit of that, just to show people how serious some of these South County the South County opposition can be. They literally bust these folks in.
It's about 2,000 people, I think.
Yeah, that many, really? I didn't do a head count, but it was mayhem. And it stopped everything. It was number 17 South County NIMBYs at Civic Center.
No Pen City! 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 We all want homelessness to end.
Now these people we just need the video on this, but because otherwise we couldn't hear ourselves talk. It was loud. It was very loud, and there were thousands of these people coming in from South County, basically, and then of course the other side of advocacy for homeless, trying to counter, and so it was it was a war of the bullhorns, if you recall. Were you there, Spencer?
Yeah, I was there.
Yeah,
I remember. It was pretty intense.
And then they all got back on their buses and went back to South County. So is that what we're facing anywhere in the county? We try and put a large facility.
It's a mixed bag. I mean, the situation in Irvine was one in which people were very afraid about threats to their kids and whatnot. So very much the proposal and the way that it was handled activated a lot of fears and concerns in the community there. But in other communities, like in Santa Ana, you've seen much less of the pushback. Santa Ana being much more of a working class community, people not having perhaps as much of an ability or time during the day to fight back. But it depends on the proposal, what kind of communication is being done. Are the local governments being proactive about saying, here is our plan to address public safety? We've seen a pattern at the county where when they try to very quickly push through a shelter proposal in a given area, there's a wave of public pushback and the proposal goes nowhere. But when a few times the county has really taken the time to hold a public forum, hear the concerns, answer the questions, have a safety plan, it does move forward. And 2 examples of that are the Kramer shelter in Anaheim that we've been talking about. There was a lot of pushback from the surrounding area. There was a neighborhood across the 91 freeway from there.
Numerous public hearings.
A lot of pushback, and the county ended up holding a very large public meeting at a church in Anaheim.
It was like 2,000 people. It was
over 1,000 people came, and everyone who wanted to speak had about 30 seconds to speak and ask a question. And they had a panel of officials and the nonprofit contractor there to answer the questions, to speak to the concerns, and to explain the plan. And that project did go through. That shelter is now.
So what do you think put that project over the top? The Kramer
there was
project.
there was a political will to do it at the time, and when there was the pushback from the public, the county went back and developed plans and made plans to hear from the public and answer to the concerns and
outreach.
questions, and it did end up happening. And somewhat similarly, there's a proposed county mental health center, crisis center in Orange, on the riverbed actually, called Anita Place, that the county was more proactive at doing outreach to the city and treating the city more as a partner rather than an obstacle to overcome. And the city was receptive to it and did not fight the county purchasing the property and working to turn that into a mental health center.
Okay. So all of these efforts are now floaters out there in various stages of thought process, if not not development. Now comes the Joint Powers Authority initiative, wanting to put together, as Susan Price indicated in a recent meeting, 2,700 permanent supportive housing units. What Andrew Doe called, the chairman of the Board of Supervisors for the County of Orange, called the missing piece of the puzzle. Having been through the riverbed process and the motel process, as tortuous as the riverbed process was, and as, in my mind, feeble as the motel process was, I saw a number of people fall out of the system entirely, and for all I know are still out on the street. I can speak to a number of cases of that. Is it permanent supportive housing? Certainly is, as the judge called it, the rainbow at the end of the road. Remember when Judge Carter called it that? And then and
gold at the end of the rainbow,
something like
along
that.
those
Yeah.
lines.
There's a lot of pieces missing in between, and my observation is that people are falling through those cracks before they ever get to the gold at the end of the rainbow, those 2,700 permanent supportive housing through the public-private partnership and Joint Powers Authority with the Irvine Company and Lennar and maybe Disney and whoever else involved on the private side in the county and cities on the public side. What's your observation about what is needed right now? Permanent supportive housing, no matter how golden it might be, is never going to go online it isn't going to go online for a while. There may be some small little increment of it.
Right. There could be a few hundred coming later this year, but it's a ramp up over the next 3 or 4 years.
We're talking about hundreds, if not thousands of people, which, as you said earlier, is growing. That number is continuing to grow of homeless in Orange County. What do we do in the meantime?
The advocates and the judge, and there's even some on the county that have recognized, we need more shelter beds, right? And that's why Carter's pushing for what he calls the SPA zones, service planning areas. You have your North County, Central, and South County, and he's pushing for locations in each one. And there's also there's joint efforts by the cities. Right now, there's Fullerton, Anaheim, Buena Park. I spoke with the Fullerton Mayor, Doug Chafee. They're still looking for a site for. He's not sure if it's going to be completely low barrier, kind of like Courtyard, or if it's going to look more like Kramer. At one point here in Market, it might be somewhere in between. I think they're just trying to get it to some level, get the residents some level of comfort where they'll be able to put a shelter in that part of the county. But anyways, there is an understanding. Jim Gardner understands it. Mayor Lake Forest, that you need shelter beds before you get homeless people to permanent supportive housing.
Right.
They need to be able to get there. That way they get in line. There's always a queue for programs like this. And then your different your different housing projects are going to be for a different audience, right? So you're going to have like a more family oriented one, veterans, maybe more. I've heard some of the advocates say, hey, we need one with more mental health treatment or care, maybe an elderly one. That way it's kind of a little bit more targeted for each demographic. So that way it gives them, it's kind of like a holding place, right?
Yeah.
So they're not out on the streets. And speaking with the advocates and different officials, that seems to be the route
The
that
intermediate
many are going. Yeah,
measure.
and it's the fastest way, whether it be like Carter advocates tough sheds, or some of the, like in some of the B-roll we saw the interview, the old U.S. Army tents, or something.
Yeah.
But somewhere to get them a little bit more stabilized than they are now, wandering park to park, street to street.
The way Judge Carter has framed it in terms of what his expectations are is that people who don't want help, they will, he has no problem with them being arrested for anti-camping citations, drug use, etc. But that for those who do want help and do want to get off the streets and get a job and get their own place, people who want to improve their lives, that there should be options available. People who want to get off the streets, there should be a shelter bed available for them. And that's sort of become the impetus for all these cities looking for sites.
Well, in fact, in the June 13th meeting, the final conclave, Judge Carter said he would convene with all the cities and mayors and city managers, in which he brought each city into his back office one at a time. A very long day for all of us at the courthouse.
12 hours.
Yeah, right. Some progress was made, especially in the North County cities, Anaheim, Orange.
Not Orange, it was Anaheim, Santa Ana, Huntington Beach, Westminster.
Yeah, between them, cumulatively, some 600-700 housing
shelter beds,
were established.
Well, I would say they were committed. They did not outline where they would be, or for most of the beds, not even when they would be online, but certainly North County cities committed to pursuing it.
And made a commitment, and which is more than we can say for South County. Because what on June 13th, Judge Carter was asking for, remember, sites, S-I-T-E-S, sites. Didn't want commissions, didn't want to hear about another convening of a panel. He wanted to see sites. I think the North County gave him, to some extent, some of that information. South County came back 0. Got nothing for you, Judge. And what was it? Irvine Mayor's what's
Don Wagner?
Wagner's statement to the judge. We got nothing.
Yeah, he didn't speak, at least in the public session, on that court hearing. But I did talk to him in the hallway after Judge Carter had met with the South County city officials for anywhere to 1 to 2 hours or more in private. And what Wagner had told myself and a reporter for NPR was that they had not identified sites in South County, but they would be going back and looking for sites potentially in an industrial area. Since then, he said perhaps centrally located in South County, but they have not said that they found any particular sites. And Carter has been really asking South County to find a site, given that Santa Ana and Anaheim already are disproportionately carrying much of the burden in terms of shelter locations and shelter beds currently for single men and women on the streets, who are the majority of the unsheltered homeless population.
Okay, well, we even long-form journalism has to wind down at some point. So, but I'm really happy to have had this hour plus with both of you gentlemen.
Thanks for having
us. I can't leave the table without asking the question, broaching the subject of reporter fatigue. Working and interviewing people on the riverbed was one of the most stressful things I ever did. And I just wonder if you guys had a similar, at some point, experienced a kind of reporter fatigue, maybe even physical breakdown to some extent. I know there were people out there that ended up in the hospital. The dust, the dirt,
sure.
But just the constant exposure to this kind of stressful life and difficult stories to hear, to digest, to assess, and try and objectify. Did it get to you guys at any point?
Sure. I'll admit it takes a toll on you, Number one, physically, I was exhausted after I think they wrapped up February 28th. Like the very last day of February was the very last day.
26th, I think.
I think it went a little longer, but either way, the end of February. So come March 1st, I was exhausted, physically for sure. And I'm sure you were too, lugging around the camera, but the trail is 2 to 3 miles. You walk it at least a few times every single day. Mm-hmm. And you're out there all day. And like you said, it was cold. It was winter time. At times it was really windy. So naturally, physically, I was pretty tired. And then, I guess you could say emotionally, I was a little tired. Somewhat like the Debbie's story, is a little, it could take a little on you, but I can definitely see how, like a fatigue would set in.
Did you have to take a break?
Actually, I didn't take a break from it. I was out there every single day, but, talking even with like some of the city networkers, just nothing for the story, just chit-chatting them up, different volunteers, even people with Camp Hope. Like, hey, man, you a little tired? And everybody kind of had the same thing, even a couple of sheriffs. Just mentally I'm tired, especially in the last stretch of February, the last week. I was getting that from, like I said, sheriffs, volunteers, CityNet people, people from Camp Hope, So, I can definitely, say that there was general fatigue, and I don't think it was just to reporters. I think it was everybody out there, and especially including the homeless, but just everybody that was out on that riverbed for that month and a half, very tired afterwards.
I know several of the advocates that had to, take a break. Some of them even had to take a break in a hospital because they were so ill from the dust and the debris out there that and maybe it was something else too. Maybe there was more to it than just that.
It was flu season.
Yeah, well, and maybe the immune system is also susceptible to emotional stress as well. So, and there certainly was a great deal of that out there, and continues to be so on the streets. The homeless people, we sharpen our pencils, write our stories, shoot our pictures, file our stories, move on to the next story. Even if it's the same story, it's still another day. It's still another aspect of that. But these folks, they have to live it every day that are out there on the streets. And there were sometimes, some places, we got off the riverbed, and after the February 26th roll-up, when Carol Sobel announced it's a wrap, they were still out there, and I and another fellow, we continued to follow them, and we wanted to know where they went from the riverbed, if they weren't going into the motels, and many of them went under the bridges and along the railroad tracks, and some just refused to come in from the cold. In fact, I have one last little clip that we took, and if we could roll that, Jeffrey, let's see. It's the underbridge clip, if we can find that. There's Orange Thorpe Avenue. And there were people, this is after the riverbed had been cleared. And there's people living in there, a lot of them, right now, under some of these bridges. And it literally, every bridge across the 57 freeway was like this. And you don't see them in the shot right now because they tend to avoid the camera. But they are there. They are still there. Mm-hmm. And they are still living out there in the elements. So we probably should not forget that fact and remember that there are still people out there that need we somehow have to reach out for them too. I want to complete this program by asking you both if you both believe that this issue, this crisis, will ever resolve itself. Your personal thoughts on this.
Well,
is it just
not my personal thoughts, but my
analysis,
analysis,
a fact of life?
My understanding from talking to a lot of different people inside government and on the streets and in the advocacy community is that there will probably always be homeless people on the streets.
Sure.
Question is, will this trend of ever growing homelessness reverse itself and come down? And I do believe it's possible, but there's a lot that would have to happen before that reaches that point. And it takes really a community-wide effort to do that, and coordination across the community. This idea of siloed institutions kind of picking off pieces of it, we've seen that that doesn't really get to the heart of the issue. And so it's possible to, I think, stem that tide, but there's a lot of other factors that are driving it up, like the ever deepening housing shortage, which is driving up the cost of rent and housing, where the median cost of a single bedroom apartment is $1,800 a month in Orange County and continuing to rise. So there's some really fundamental issues that are pushing more and more people into homelessness, and until that's addressed, we're going to continue to see those numbers rise.
Okay. Well, I think as reporters, guys, you'd agree we've run out of road here as far as we can take our observations and our speculations. So we'll leave the next step up to the politicians. But I'd like to leave the last word up to a homeless person. I think it's fitting that we do that. And that homeless person we've talked about earlier in the show, a gentleman by the name of Patrick Hogan. Now, Patrick Hogan is a homeless person, lived on the riverbed. Also wrote the now famous River Wash pamphlet that was passed around the riverbed, 7, 8 editions of it. He's pursuing that in a magazine format. But I'd like to leave you folks out there in the audience, whatever side you've come down on in this issue, with the following comments by Patrick Hogan, Riverbed resident and journalist, with the following words.
Okay, this is the lead story from the Riverbed Wash, 6th edition. No home for homeless. In the weeks following E-Day, the media faded away after having chewed up as much as they could. Then the plan to rid Orange County of citizens who were homeless was implemented. The kid gloves came off, and what once were tickets and warnings now became arrests and property seizures. This plan, beginning at almost a year to date, after the injunction to stop county workers from throwing away personal property or storing it too far for owners to retrieve it. This plan, beginning after the federal government allocated funds specifically for the homeless in California. This plan, beginning in one of America's richest counties. This plan, beginning with no thought to long-term solution. This plan, which gave taxpayers' money to housing brokers who used police to gather information needed for arrests. This plan, designed to scatter citizens out of sight once and for all. This plan, that created an atmosphere of hate, where a citizen felt justified in setting a homeless person on fire, and police practically endorsed it. This plan, which according to experts is doomed to failure. This plan, which according to the laws of war, the Geneva Convention, would be a war crime. This plan, this uncaring, non-thinking, short-term solution, reeks of corruption, prejudice, and heartlessness, and failure. The homeless, with the support of coalitions, volunteers, and caring, thinking citizens, have a better long-term solution, if only someone would listen.
Well, right after that interview, I asked Mr. Hogan a question. I said, what's the most important thing that someone walking down the street and passing a homeless person on the street can do for them or say to them? And he said something that surprised me. I wasn't expecting. He said, I said, well, should I put something in their tin cup? I mean, could I put a couple bucks in their tin cup? Could I buy them a pizza? Is that what I should do? And he said, no. The most important thing you can do for a homeless person going down the street and seeing them is stop, sit down at their eye level, and ask them to tell you their story. And 9 times out of 10, he said they will. They will. They're anxious to do that, he said. And he said, you will see that they are not that different from you, and they are not that far removed from your life. And I thought that was very interesting, very sage, if you will, advice. Because the more we know someone, the less we hate them. And the less we hate them, the less we villainize them. So I think that's the point that I would like to leave with you today about this discussion on the Riverbed roll-up. And I want to thank my guests, reporters Nick Gerda and Spencer Custodio of the Voice of OC. You guys have done some really wonderful work reporting on the Riverbed and after, and I'm very honored to have you both in the studio here to try and unpack this story with me. Your firsthand observations are very important to this program and to the history of this very seminal event that we call the Riverbed Homeless Evictions of 2018. These reporters know that this is just the first chapter in what we hope will be a more positive future for homelessness, the homeless crisis in Orange County. And certainly they and I and others will be watching in the months to come closely to see how the next chapter plays out. Because the outcome is not just about the homeless here. It's really about all of us and how we deal with it. For Backstory, I'm John Underwood. See you next time.